All right. Dawson, you there?
I'm here.
Awesome. Let me just get this. I told somebody I'd do an Instagram live. So we'll get this rolling Instagram live at Baseball Concept on Instagram. And then we will get rolling here. And we've had a couple questions submitted. We're going to invite others to do that as well. I'll probably go into that in a second once I get that Instagram live video rolling here. All right, cool. All right, we are live. Cool. All right, so for all our Instagram followers out there, we're doing a talk today with Eric Dawson. He's our mental health coach at Baseball Concepts, and he's got a bunch of tremendous things to say today. I'll show you guys all him real quick. Dawson, what's up? It's all the Instagram.
Happy Monday.
All right, cool. You know what? I'm going to hold this just kind of like this. We're going to go through this talk and kind of get into it here. It's going to be all about mental health. It's going to be all about teens all the way up through NCAA athletes and beyond. And it's just aimed at taking this time and using it wisely to explore positive things that we can be doing, also some things that maybe we can't really didn't really foresee happening to us mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I mean, you name it. Dawson is an awesome person to talk about all those things. He's been through the ringer on a personal side, and also has a plethora of knowledge through schooling and through life. And now is settling down in New York with his wife. But I'll let him kind of further talk about his just everything. I mean, schooling, just your experience in mental health and experience in sports in general.
So just to give a bit of an overview on who I am, I'll start with my playing career, I guess. So I was a Division I athlete at the University of Dayton. My junior year going into my senior year, my junior summer going into my senior year, I knew that I was going to the University of Dayton. Also had some other things going on behind the scenes that I was not making known to anyone else. And in the back of my head was hoping that I could kind of manage them on my own in terms of my own mental health. And spent a year at Dayton, but my own mental health struggles and lack of support in that area kind of caught up to me eventually. And so by my sophomore year, I left the school, went to get my health taken care of, basically. So took 3 months off. And then when I reevaluated, it made more sense to return to a different school rather than back to Dayton. And I transferred to Hope College. And I would say that my kind of, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker at this point. But I think my kind of social work career began in some ways at Hope as a player. I came out of my, the mental health treatment essentially with a new perspective on what mattered most. And in my mind, being healthy and being connected and being in community was, the top priority, which you remember how, the kinds of things that I emphasized when I was at Hope. So yeah, that's kind of where my interest in mental health began. And so I was at Hope for 4 years, had a relatively successful playing career. There was still a lot of, inner pressure, demon anxiety, just a lot of pressure really that I continued to battle at Hope. But got into the field of social work, not really with the intention of working with athletes or not knowing that was a thing. So sports psychology was something that I'd heard plenty about, and everything that I read about it at that time, it was like performance. Everything was about, optimizing performance, which is like, at the time was like kind of interesting to me, but not as interesting as wellness and health and making sure that the individual is, doing well and kind of a larger picture. So that's why I kind of took the social work path. So my first exposure to my wife and I moved out to New York, and this was 2014. I worked at a high school in East Brooklyn for my first year at social work school, and found that I just kind of gravitated towards the athletes, and found that it was easiest to connect with them. So I ran kind of after school basketball program, a weightlifting program, but really with the intention of creating space to talk about other things that were going on in life. So we started talking about gang violence. We started talking about just the pressures of being, becoming a man. Just a lot of conversation around development, identity, what matters to people, and that definitely. At the time, again, I didn't realize that there was a space for sports and social work and mental health, and so it's definitely an emerging field that's. A lot of people are talking about it, and I think there's been some really great steps in terms of especially universities employing individuals to care for their student athletes.
Yeah, 100%. And something that Doss won't tell you guys is that he was a freak. It probably still is. And when I say probably, definitely. If you guys follow him on Instagram, you see him doing a bunch of backflips. A freak athlete. I mean, can jump, can run, and really could do it all. And was just, we got him, and I came in, we played college baseball together, and we're like, how did we get this kid? And we always found ourselves competing in, I mean, you name it, basketball, spike ball, and it's that's just something he won't tell you. But freak athlete, and he touched on a little bit how his social work career maybe started a little bit early at Hope College. That's kind of an understatement, in my opinion. It was just kind of like guys on the team really gravitated toward Doss to just lean on for wisdom and all of this stuff. And I think I speak for a lot of the guys by saying, like, I don't know why we kind of gravitated toward you. You just had this kind of cool, crazy story. You were going through this awesome transformation, just an awesome human being, and just wise beyond your years in those years and still now. And I think that's why all of us felt that way and still do, honestly, which is probably the reason why we're sitting here today. And to see that you actually went to school physically for all the stuff that you were doing for us before, which we probably gave you a little bit more experience than school ever could at Hope. And I know that you guided a lot of young guys, including myself, just toward, I mean, whatever that may be, spiritual, physical, just wisdom in general. So we love you and appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No doubt, man. So I don't want to keep cruising here. You said that you didn't know that you could mix all of those things together, and that was like the health, all of that stuff, the social work, all that stuff, which tells you what the current state of mental health in the athletic field looks like today. And the fact that you, as a smart, talented, college educated individual, didn't know that all those things could commingle, I think kind of alludes to a bigger issue here. Not across the nation, but I mean beyond. And sports are a crazy thing. They've taught me personally, and I know I speak for a lot of people as well, just how to cope with things, how to battle, how to struggle, how to succeed, how to unify, how to play as a team, how to be a team player in that, how to maybe take a back seat sometimes and that being okay, how to be the guy sometimes, and how you need to step up in big situations, and do it with confidence, even though you don't know if you're going to get it done or not internally. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I have taken, and you guys could, I mean, we could go forever about, analogies on life and sports. But stuff that they just don't tell you, man, is all the pressure, the anxiety, all of that stuff, and how it just hypes up, and the more you do it and the longer you play, unfortunately, kind of the more people expect greatness, expect results, expect all of these things out of you. And sometimes that even starts early on, as one of the questions that was submitted was about, parents and stuff like that. But that stuff starts really early on, just expecting results, expecting to be great. And if you're playing a game like baseball, which 3 out of 10 times at the plate, if you're getting a hit, like, you got a good chance to get yourself into the Hall of Fame. So you're failing 7 out of 10 times when you're playing just baseball in general. And I mean, you talk about golf, talk about failure sports. And that takes a heavy toll on a person. So I kind of wanted to touch on the current state of mental health in athletics and just kind of get your perspective on that to start.
Yeah. So, and just to give a little bit more background, so I was thinking a lot, and this probably started in 2014, 2015, about the integration of mental health in sports and athletics. And it wasn't really until last summer that I discovered that, at least in my field in social work, there's an alliance of social workers in sport. So these are social workers who specifically are looking to work in the realm of sport. And that was created, I think, in 2015. So again, it's that's been a great community of people or like-minded people to discover, oh my gosh, this person's doing this at Auburn and this person's doing this at Georgia, and and to see that there are people in the field doing this work, supporting student athletes. But again, it's very new. So it definitely is an emerging field. I think that the toughest thing, and this is often the case with mental health, is convincing the right people that that I can bring value to their athletic department, that I can bring value to their program. And there's some people where you don't have to convince them, but there's plenty of people where it's a lot of self-advocacy. Just like anything new, you're promoting it, you're explaining how it works. So it's a lot of front end work in that regard. But in terms of where things are at, so big D1 universities, at this point, it would be shocking if they didn't have what a lot of schools are labeling an athletic counselor. And so an athletic counselor is someone who is a mental health professional, a licensed mental health provider who's working specifically with their student athletes. So this is mostly working in regards of their mental health, but there's also like a decent amount of, and this is where it gets a little bit blurry in terms of services, but there's also a decent amount of like performance focused consulting. And so it's not therapy so much as it is talking about ways to get an athlete's mindset in a place where they can perform at their best. And so if they if you were to be anyway, so that's kind of when I was at Hope last year working with the baseball team, that was more of what I was doing, was more of the mindset, mindfulness, mind-body connection, anxiety reduction, so stuff that's more performance oriented. But yeah, so currently there's a ton of universities that have mental health counselors that are specifically working with their athletes, and a lot of social workers would be saying, a lot of people in the mental health field would say that it's still, for as much money as a lot of these universities are making, in order to, to kind of return, or just to care for their athletes who are, making a lot of that money for the university, to have services to make sure that these athletes are being taken care of as best as possible, due to some of the, and I can talk more about this too, increased, challenges that do come with being an athlete. There are definitely perks and elements that I think have been emphasized a lot in media. Growing up, it was always like, athletes have it, the easiest, but as you just spoke to too, Dev, there are aspects of being an athlete that aren't necessarily desirable. There are challenges with being an athlete that that go less noticed than other people, I think.
Yeah. 100%. And I think that the reason that, you think about schools like Hope, and Hope College has, it's private institution, and it costs a lot of money to go there. So a school like that can easily say, oh yeah, I think we can maybe do an athletic counselor. It's not going to hurt us too much. But you look at other schools with smaller budgets, and then you see like, oh, I know this guy, it's going to be another salary I have to pay, blah, 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 blah. So I think that's kind of maybe the thought process of some schools. But I think you and I would both agree that that's kind of BS, and that's a priority check, to where you say, oh, this is kind of an extra thing that would be really nice for our players, rather than like, this is an essential thing for my athletes, for athletes in general to have. So I think it's a priority switch kind of throughout the NCAA and throughout institutions, even high school. I think would be huge. I mean, and you throw somebody into a school with 3,000 kids in it, with 1,000 athletes, and that guy at that school in a high school is going to have his hands full, and all the stuff that he's doing is going to be legit work. And touching, kind of building on that, like teenagers, it's such a crazy time. And I think that we forget. I mean, I'm 27 now. What are you, 28 now? 29 now. And get yourself back into your mindset when you're 14, 15, 16 years old. I mean, you're like, you don't even know what to think. Your body's feeling all funky. You got this young testosterone just coursing through your veins, and that's driving a lot of decisions that you're making. And it's just a crazy time. And quite literally, your brain is wiring itself to set you up. To set you up for the rest of your life. And you get these deep pits, and you get these like super high highs, and it's just nothing makes sense some days. Sometimes you feel invincible and you got it all figured out, and that's one day to the next day. And it's like, how do you even begin to navigate that? And there's help, but like, how many kids are going to see somebody and really navigate the inner workings of themselves, and just throw being an athlete and having all that stress and pressure on top of that, and then throw schooling on top of that. Well, you got to get into a good school. There's just a lot of layers to this that I think get neglected and really don't. There's not really a vibrant light shined on these, I wouldn't say issues. I think it's just being a human being. Part of that is being neglected, and maybe there's just something else there. And hopefully, talks like this can help continue to advocate towards more of that stuff. So, I think you've worked with some teens, right? In the past. So maybe talk about your experience with that, and maybe how it pertains to athletics in general. And then just kind of talk further about just maybe how you see that stuff developing in the future.
I've had a chance to work with a lot of performers, a lot of athletes for sure, but also, lawyers, bankers. I've worked with, so being in New York is like I've worked with comedians, I've worked with dancers, musical theater performers, so people who perform for a living. And I think one of the things, and this is a little bit separate, but in thinking about athletes in terms of what the research has suggested in looking at like how prevalent different mental health issues are with different subgroups of people. So athletes don't score higher on anxiety, depression, substance abuse. They do on binge drinking and the ways in which they engage substances, there is a difference to some degree, but for the most part, it's similar to general population, which struck me as surprising. But the thing that is statistically in a big way different from the rest of the population is their help-seeking behavior is much lower. So if they do feel or notice that something is off or wrong, athletes in terms of the research are much less likely to make it known and ask for help. And I think that is part of, on one hand, the beauty of sport, just watching that Michael Jordan 2 parts last night, being like, gosh, this guy was so determined, like nothing was going to stop him. And that obviously was a huge asset that he had. On the flip side, in terms of health and general health, if there's a message in my head that no matter what I encounter, I have to be the one to overcome it. That just, when it comes to mental health, that isn't a useful message. And so that's a long way of saying that, I think it's especially important to your point, Deb, during a time where there's a lot of change happening physically, mentally, emotionally, and how you're, what I remember from being, 13, 14, 15 was just trying to make sense of like how the world worked. It just like, there were so many things that I thought were one way. And I was, as I was kind of emerging into somewhat of an adult form. I was realizing that things weren't quite the way that I'd been told they were, and that didn't make sense. And having someone to bounce that off of course, friends are huge, but having some kind of, whether it's an uncle or I don't know, a cousin, someone to just have a space where you can express the confusion, the curiosity, the how does this work, how does that work. It can happen through a therapeutic relationship with a mental health provider, which is awesome, but I think there are other ways to find that in your community, and granted, the person needs to be trustworthy, but I guess I wish there and again, maybe I don't acknowledge that at 14, 15, maybe part of me wanted to be talking about that. Another part of me wanted to be as normal as possible. And I didn't want to acknowledge that I was, feeling lonely or feeling whatever, that those things, I was so afraid of being the only one who felt that way that I was too scared to share that. So yeah, I think I'm hoping that, there's a bit of a change in terms of the culture of sport, not to take away the tenacity and the determination that people have, but if and when there is a roadblock that can't be overcome or pushed through or whatever, for there to be an awareness of who to go to, and how to address that, rather than, it all of a sudden becoming this isolated, I have to figure this out myself, and if I can't, then I'm screwed kind of feeling.
Yeah, and for all the teens and athletes out there that could potentially be watching this, just understand that you are not alone in your feelings and your thoughts. The fact that you feel crazy, the fact that you feel super high and super low, the fact that you're questioning things and things aren't making sense and that's frustrating to you, that is the human nature. That's normal. And you guys really need to understand and hear that. For real. There was days that made no sense, and then I felt like I was on a just completely on a mountaintop by myself, and nobody else really understood what was going on. But just understand, help is out there. If you guys look for it, you will find it. And if you have somebody good and quality to confide in, use them, lean on them, lean into them, just for wisdom and knowledge and all of that stuff. So those are great points. And also I wanted to talk about so you brought up the whole failure thing. I think failure is I want to use the right words here, but I think failure is overused, in the whole, it's just kind of like one of those words like love, where people say it and it doesn't have the gravity that you think it should, because it's so real to some people, but sometimes it just skims right off the top of your head when you hear it. And failure is a real thing, and not allowing yourself to fail in that mentality and that thought process, right? So you talk about Michael Jordan, and Tim Grover is a guy that wrote Relentless, and talks about, Kobe, Mike, Dwayne Wade, and just how those guys just were wired differently to not fail. But if you look at personal side of things, I mean, I think Dwayne Wade might be an exception to this, but personal side of things, it's just normally there's a lot of give and take there, between your will to win, and you'll do nothing to stop that. And kind of you taking care of your emotions and all of that sort of thing. Another one that comes to mind is Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was training, for I don't know what Mr. Olympia it was. His dad died during his training, and somebody told him that he was in the middle of a workout, obviously, and was okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then just kept lifting,
Mm-hmm.
just kept lifting. And then he goes back and talks about that in the documentary. I can't remember the documentary's name. But he talks about that, and he's like, I'm just too locked in to worry about that right now. I don't even think he went to his own father's funeral. And just the sacrifices that you make to not fail. I mean, you look at, I think it's Japan, and I don't want to miss any statistics, but you look at Japan and how there was a high suicide rate in Japan because it's just a culture of not failing, and parents really just not letting their kids fail, business owners not letting their businesses fail despite it was a good idea, but it just didn't work out, liquidate the assets, get out of there. They just won't let themselves fail, and then they're just stressed to death because they won't let their business fail. And just that mentality, that thought process is destructive, in a lot of situations. I mean, sometimes, granted, it's really good to feel those things, but I think that not allowing yourself to fail, is no good. Failure, I think, is an opportunity to grow for athletes within the game and outside of the game. I know that if you fail, and me personally, I mean, we can talk about baseball. If you strike out, if you make an error, whatever, and you quote unquote fail, right? You need to see that as opportunity for growth. You need to look at that and say, like, oh, what did I do that got me to that end result? How do I then make a positive adjustment to where obviously it's going to happen again, but how do I mitigate the amount of times that certain thing does happen, right? And you can apply that to a lot of different things in life. And then let's just keep rolling with a couple of statistics while we're talking about it. So talking about the NCAA, sports science. So these were released by the NCAA. Sports Science Institute specifically did the testing. 30% of athletes report being consistently overwhelmed, while 25% report being mentally exhausted from the mental demands of their sport. And just talking further about that, when I was in school, I was playing ball. I was obviously doing the school thing, and I was working like 25 hours a week, waiting tables so we could pay.
You were grinding.
Yeah, pay rent for sure. And I'm not complaining, but it's like some days you wake up and you're like, shoot, man, I just do not want to do this today. And it's like, get up, you got to go to your class, get up. And a lot of times we had 6 a.m. lifts or 5 a.m. practices. And we'd get up, we'd go to practice, we'd scarf breakfast down. From there, we'd go to our first class of the day, take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. Hopefully you did the assignment. Hopefully you did it well. Hopefully you didn't have anxiety about the assignment. Maybe there's a test, you don't really know. And then that gets you to lunch. Lunch will then probably get you to another class. Then you got, whatever, if we had a lift, maybe potentially a little workout in the afternoon. And then after that, you're going to work. And it was just so much. And some days you're just like, I do not want to do this. And I think day after day after day of that, I mean, that's going to break a lot of people down. Right. So looking for that balance, right? So that's where I struggle maybe a little bit. Maybe that's where you can touch on a little bit more. Just balance, right? So you talk about one more statistic, and I'll give you the floor on all this stuff. I got to find it here really quick. So in the last 20 years, between ages 10 and 24, the suicide rate has gone up more than double. And if that doesn't say something about the current state of mental health in young people, I don't know what does. So just understanding those things and how mental health being works, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think it starts with, your points on failure. So I was at Georgetown and worked not with student athletes, but with students, and the general climate or attitude, or not even attitude, but I guess mental health climate that was, I've read 3 or 4 books about this, but to see it in person was different in terms of there seems to be so 16 to 18 in 2020, the age of 16 to 8 is different than being a 16 to 18-year-old in 2000. The context of our world is different. And these lead to, different ways in which people experience themselves. And I think, so one of the things that I think a lot of universities are seeing with their college students, and this isn't news necessarily, but college students are having a lot harder time being able to handle essentially failure. So, I can recall several sessions with students who they were coming up on an exam or having to write a paper or something that involved, that was going to be graded, that was going to be judged essentially. And there was, and again, not that this is abnormal necessarily for there to be a lot of weight on how one does or what the outcome of their performance is, but the response, if it wasn't what they had hoped or imagined for themselves, is kind of the thing that people are observing as being different. So I worked with clinicians who had been at the university for 30 plus years, and they were kind of besides themselves on how quickly students went from being okay to then being totally kind of like, in a hole, feeling depressed, unmotivated, feeling like crap, feeling like they're a failure, like nothing they do matters, and just going to a very low and dark place very, relatively quickly in these clinicians' eyes. And that's an interesting kind of dynamic that I think is happening. And I think part of it is due to, so failure is interesting because failure is completely subjective, like more or less. There are definitely, there are, you could look at someone's, performance on a basketball court and say, yeah, they were 0 for 10. They clearly failed today. But a lot of failure is how one defines their, what they're trying to do in the first place. So if I'm trying to, every at bat, if I'm trying to move a runner in a scoring position and I go 0 for 4, that could be a success for me for what my agenda is for myself as a player. So I think it speaks to the importance of individuals really spending some time, especially, kids or, adolescents, I'm sure you don't like being called kids, but like, defining as a 14-year-old or as a 15-year-old, for me, if I had defined, what are my objectives as an athlete? What kind of athlete do I want to become? And granted, you're not going to have all the answers, but I think beginning that conversation with yourself and determining kind of where you want to improve, where you want your focus to be, I think the value in that is if and when you don't accomplish that, to your point, Dev, you have a clear sense of what you're trying to accomplish in terms of yourself as an athlete. So you can pick yourself back up and say, okay, maybe I did strike out twice and make an error today. However, I really liked, what my approach was during these 3 at bats. I felt like I was totally on the, I knew what was coming. I missed my pitches. So what? I'll put in the training to make sure I don't miss those pitches again. But, I was there mentally where I wanted to be. So I think there's a lot to be said about creating, athletes creating their own value system of, what is it that they're, rather than just inheriting or taking on whatever the coach is saying, whatever the parents are saying. And granted, it's not easy to quiet, those voices out, but, as you get older, if you're going to, if this is going to be meaningful to you as an athlete in terms of your athletic performance or career or pursuits, but then also if you're going to, I think the only way you can really manage it in a way that's going to be good for your entire health is if you do have that sense of, if there is clarity in terms of what your objectives are.
Yeah. And just understanding that, I own a baseball training facility. I coach college baseball, played college baseball, manage a baseball center, like a large multi-million-dollar baseball center. So a lot of the analogies we're going to give are baseball related, but don't just hear the baseball and be like, oh, this doesn't apply to me. Like if you need a mentality switch, let's say you're a cornerback playing football or whatever. And you get burned and some guy scores a game-winning touchdown on you, right? Obviously, we're bummed out about that. You would consider maybe a failure. But look at it. Like, did I have all the coverages right? Was I in the right spot at that time? And if you can say yes consistently across the board throughout the course of the game because you did the homework to understand where you need to be on the field and stuff, guys, you're gonna get burned. Right, you're gonna get burned. You're gonna strike out. You're gonna make errors. You're gonna shank golf balls all over the place. Every sport that you play, you're gonna fail, right? But if
you're not gonna perform as optimally. You can't always perform at your peak. However, it's the difference between not reaching my peak in terms of how I feel about myself versus not reaching. I think that's the difference in terms of athletes who can have resiliency or who have resiliency is that it's not so connected to their personal identity and they're not performing in order to validate themselves or to justify themselves to someone else. Again, this is easy to talk about, very different the actual experience of it. But that difference between this is something I'm doing and wanting to get really good at and I happen to not do it that well today is there's feelings there, but that's different than, this is I need to shoot under par here in order to like be the golf player that everyone thinks I am or whatever it is. Then that's maybe not quite life or death, but that's where pressure comes in, because there's a need there that's different from, I want to perform as well as I possibly can because I know how good I am. That's a different kind of just like tone.
Yeah. And I think kind of continue to build on that. Like,
Yeah.
I think that one of the reasons I didn't mentally explode was over time, I subconsciously was able to compartmentalize being competitive, competing. Whether that's with myself in a weight room, or whether that's on a field, whether that's taking ground balls, whether that's playing pickup basketball with my friends, whether that's playing video games with my friends. I can compartmentalize that competitiveness most of the time. I mean, granted, sometimes I let it get out of hand. Maybe I'm driving on the road and I get, see some guy next to me, I have to drive a little faster. That's not exactly compartmentalizing. But as a whole, I think compartmentalizing that really helps you to be able to step away, and also look at from a third party view to then give you perspective changes, right? So give you
and again, you're competing against yourself, and granted there can be unhealthy ways to do that, but generally if there's a sense of you're the one pushing yourself, I think that's a healthier place than feeling like it's mom or dad or coach or whomever.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, track, wrestling, golf. I mean, you talk about individual sports. I mean, track and wrestling are technically team sports, but really where you're competing against yourself. I guess wrestling not so much. It doesn't really make much sense. But those individual sports where you're, anything track related, cross country related, golf, all that stuff. We're kind of talking to you here. So I know you just touched on, maybe instead of tuning out, maybe your parent, coach, going through if you play baseball as long as we have. I mean, we played baseball for 20 years. You're going to have that parent in the stands. You're going to have that coach. I mean, we've all had them. I was lucky enough to have a bunch of great coaches. I also had a bunch of coaches, not a bunch, a couple that were, whenever I was in the batter's box, I was thinking about them. I wasn't thinking about my at bat. I wasn't thinking about anything. And there's a lot of kids in the stands where if they're hitting or if they're on a football field or wherever that may be, they're thinking about their parent that's sitting there. You know what I mean? Just thinking about dreading that ride home in the car to where, whoever, dad, mom, uncle, whatever, cousin can get you in the car and just lay it on, So personally, I had the coaches. My parents were always pretty chill. I remember a definitive time in my baseball career where, it was always like, oh yeah, Dad, do this. My pops would always yell, do this. And one day we had a ride home in the car, and I was like, I can't. The only thing I can think about is you yelling. And to his credit, he never said really anything again. And I'm lucky, I think, in that aspect. And it all came from him just wanting to remind me of the things we've been working on, wanting me to succeed. It all comes from a good place, I think. Your folks wanting you to be successful. I think you guys all need to hear that. Like when your parents less than satisfactory, I think it comes from a good place. It's just not channeled very well through how they're behaving. So I know you probably have some stuff to say about this. You've seen people maybe have some personal experiences. Would love for you to talk to those people out there that have those issues, because there's a lot of them.
So yeah, I like the concept of tuning out and tuning in. So the idea of tuning out certain voices and tuning into your own voice, and again, initially there might be like, well, I don't know what my own voice is, or I don't know what my idea of the type of athlete I want to be, and that's totally fine. But the idea of beginning that dialogue with yourself, and granted, it can look a lot of different ways, but being in tune with that inner self, in terms of most likely there's something about the sport or activity or performance that someone's doing that they really like, or at least initially really liked about it, and making sure that gets preserved is really important. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think all parents are doing what they are hoping is the best for their kid. And as as a kid and not yet a parent, it's easier for me to say this, but as a kid, one sec. All right.
There you go.
As a kid, my frustration was always like, felt like there just wasn't, the things that mattered most to me in a game weren't always emphasized by my parents. I think my parents did a great job of not, of being very, they paid very close attention to what happened in games. So after games and car rides, they would note, my mom would notice or observe some moment in the game that I was like, oh, it's interesting that she noticed that, I don't know, whatever. I was, what would she notice? Something about like a reaction that I had. And I remember thinking that was like nice that she was paying that close of attention. And my dad and I usually talked about like how I performed. And I don't ever remember those conversations being like, I wouldn't say I dreaded them, but I definitely, so I was a three sport athlete since I was 13. And I think what I really wanted was just to talk about anything other than sports. So that's kind of where I was at. That's maybe what I needed in those moments, in terms of, rather than talking about the game, can we just talk about anything else? Just like, I felt so limited by my athletic identity that was a hard thing for me to navigate. It's like, I don't want to talk about, that at bat, or whether it was good or bad. I don't really want to talk about it. So yeah, I think it's for parents. I think this is maybe the hardest thing. I think parents have it the hardest in some ways, in terms of like how to engage. My dad tells jokes. He coached me throughout my career, and of me running down the first base path and just saying some choice words to him about how I felt about myself, how I felt about him, how I felt about baseball. And so there's a lot of that happens, especially when parents are involved. And I think that's part of the challenge and the beauty of, being involved in your child's experience in that kind of way. But I think for parents, the biggest thing, and again, easy for me to say, not as a parent at this point, but to just give room for your child to feel whatever they're feeling initially. I'm not saying like always be validating, their emotions. Although I kind of do believe that. I think you should always be at least validating their emotions. Granted, there's teaching lessons within those emotions and whatnot, but at least initially making space for this athlete to just have their own experience first, and for them to share what their experience was. And then if there are coaching tips or parenting tips or teaching lessons or whatever, to jump in with those. But there's going to be no receptivity until the kid feels like they've been heard and understood for their own experience first.
Yeah, and that's huge. Just talking about that, like only having an identity in an athlete, and I think about, so in 15 years, say I had a kid, next year, in 15 years, like, would I be able to relate to a 14-year-old girl other than in athletics? That's what I'm thinking as an athlete, as a man, as somebody who, I have a little sister, but like, I don't know, like she liked dolls and stuff, but not at 15, like what? I think a lot of parents struggle to relate with their kids, straight up. I mean, just forget what it's like to be 15, whether that's a guy or girl or whatever. And I think that's maybe where it lies. But it sounds like just being heard, just validating emotions, hearing them out, rather than injecting your prerogative into their head.
Their experience.
Yeah, their experience. And
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if a kid comes to you and he says like, whatever, I mean, whatever, and then the second you go, okay, but, and then you jump in and you inject what you pour into their head, like that's where I think it starts to become a one-way relationship, which as a parent you need to guide.
It becomes contentious rather than like, and it's hard to inquire, it's hard to ask the question, okay, Jane, I just heard you say that you hate swimming. It's hard to be with some of the feelings that arise from sport. There's strong feelings that people have about their performance, and it's hard I think it's really challenging to be, if I heard again, imagine the same scenario, a kid of mine saying like, because I used to say this all the time, I hated football. And I would just protest before practice being like, please, I don't want to go. Please don't make me go. And it was just like, I could see my mom was so conflicted being like, well, he has said that he really enjoys this other times. And I do think it's good for him to be in whatever. She had her reasons for it, but yeah, I think it is just really hard to create that space and inquire, okay, what do you hate about football? Well, I hate all the pads and I feel like I can't even be athletic because they're keeping me back, or whatever it was that rubbed me the wrong way about it. I think it definitely, whatever. It would have been nice to be able to have that space while also the final conclusion still being, well, you're going to practice, or whatever. Like, it can be both.
It's such a fine line.
Yeah, but I totally agree. Yeah, empathizing with the challenge of relating, and it goes back to, as parents, hopefully, or as adults, hopefully we're more able to tolerate feelings of like, oh my gosh, it's so embarrassing that I don't know what TikTok is, or I don't know what whatever is, and that can be hard, I think, for a parent in their own navigation of feeling like old or isolated or not with it or whatever, and that can prevent them from engaging, I think, with their kids in certain ways.
Yeah, 100%. So parents, listen to your kids, man. Coming from a kid's perspective, right? I don't have kids. Dawson doesn't have kids yet, but he's talked to a lot of parents and kids, and this is what he's hearing across the board. Just continue to relate, and I want to talk about more proactive steps. I think we've talked about all of kind of the different struggles and all of that stuff within athletics and mental health, and just kind of shining a light on it. But at the end of the day, you need to know what to do about it. Better, especially if you're somebody like me. I'm like, okay, I have an issue, whatever that issue may be. Give me 3 things that I can do to either make this better, or at least making steps to get better. Some people trust the process, trust that time will heal. People like me don't do well with that sort of thing. So we tried to provide, we tried to provide some tangible steps and for you to take, and want to shed light on number one, and I think it's literally the most important thing, is just the human body and how we take care of that and how we nurture that. And I think what we put into our body is eventually going to help with brain health, brain function, body health, body function. The exercise that we have can also help with stress levels. So let me get into some stats here. So there is a huge deficiency of serotonin, and which is basically like your feel good stuff in your brain, and omega-3 fats and omega-6 fats in our body. And this is all coming from Dr. Mark Hyman. He wrote a book called The Ultra Mind Solution, which I read, and it was unbelievable how eye-opening this was. And the reason that we don't have that serotonin, he talked about getting an oil change, referring to omega-3 fish oils. So in the last 100 years, we are up 100,000% in the amount of processed foods that we eat as a culture. And in processed foods, there's a lot of fake stuff in there, stuff that frankly is just toxic for you. And some of the stuff that we're lacking, I mean, so human beings in general, you go way back, we fished a lot. And we got those omega-3s through eating a lot of seafood. And that's just how we kind of took care of ourselves. And that's something that we really lack. So these fatty acids, this is quoting Dr. Hyman, these fatty acids play crucial roles in cognitive development and learning, visual development, immune strength, fighting inflammation, pregnancy, brain health, and preventing Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, cancer, mental illness, and so much more. They affect every one of your 100 trillion cell membranes. And one more here, equally dramatic. One study published in British Journal of Psychiatry gave one prison group recommended daily amounts of vitamins, minerals, and omega-3s, while the other group maintained their regular diet and lifestyle. Researchers found a reduced felony level violent offenses among prisoners who took omega-3 supplements of more than 35%. And he's got countless stories. I'm not gonna go too much further into that, but he has countless stories just about how people come to him as a doctor, and he prescribes them omega-3s, vitamins, a healthy lifestyle, and how they have had lifetime of depression lifted off of their chest, feeling like, right? And just how important what you put into your body is going to set you up long term and provide that longevity for your brain. Sorry, cut out for a sec. You there?
Yeah, can I make a quick point on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, there's a couple ways of thinking about that, but the idea of, we are made up of many different parts. We have a physical self, we have a mental self, we have an internal functioning, some voluntary, some involuntary, whatever. But the idea that all of those things are part of one hopefully integrated self, that they're all of those play and affect and play off of each other. So that, generally the idea of wellness is that all systems are kind of flourishing, that's what, wellness is considered to be. And there's something else that you said. One of the things that I will often say to people and athletes especially is, everyone has a relationship with themselves, and we can have healthy relationships with ourselves and unhealthy relationships. We can have bordering on abusive relationships with ourselves, or neglectful relationships with ourselves, or very healthy, proactive, attuned relationships with ourselves. So when I hear you talk about, what are you putting in your body, and are you giving your body everything that it needs, is I think similar to saying, am I caring for, am I caring for myself in a way that I would hopefully want to care for someone else? That idea of it's a form of self-care ultimately.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to retouch back on that serotonin feel good stuff as well, and just endorphins that get released in your brain when you are physical, when you exercise, and just I could read for hours studies about how exercise drops stress levels, increases testosterone levels. I mean, it just does everything in your body that you want it to. Obviously, girls, you're not going to get a huge boost of testosterone right after working out, but just how exercise really is going to drop your stress, which is huge, and also make all of the little things in your brain that make you feel good and happy, and those things are going to start to fire. And when those things are firing on a consistent basis, when you're feeling good and your blood is pumping and your heart is working really well, instead of like having to work extra hard because you keep eating Cheetos, it's
fighting against yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you're literally. I mean, you look at we're in coronavirus time right now. The number one cause of death in the coronavirus,
obesity,
is being overweight. And it's just being, and don't beat yourself up if currently you are. Understand that right now you can do anything that you want. Tomorrow is an opportunity for you to get better, like we've already talked about. But being overweight is catastrophic to the human body, and it needs to be a priority if you're looking long term. Just plain and simple.
I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but in terms of like, so again, kind of drawing back to how, what we eat can be influenced by how we feel about ourselves. Our mental health can totally influence how, and you see it all the time. And I can, during this time of not having a ton to do, not having a ton of direction, there's, it's a very strange time mentally, emotionally. I find myself, I'm snacking and eating more candy than I've ever eaten my entire life. I'm like, what is happening? I'm like, what's happening to me right now? It's like, I'm not, there's a lot of ways to try to process. And that's, I think, clearly how I'm trying to process some of this, which is just to say, it's totally understandable, and again, I'll say valid to be turning to sources of relief and just how important it is to recognize what your sources of relief are and whether there needs to be some adjusting or not.
Yeah, and everybody has different coping mechanisms, and I think
Sure.
it's super important to, and there's a fine line here, understand that the way you feel and everything that's going on right now with all the craziness, with the COVID stuff, don't beat yourself up if you feel funny, if your habits are different, if you're spending too much time watching TV, if you're don't beat yourself up too much. But at the same time, it's an unbelievable opportunity to create whatever you want for yourself in this time. So focusing on the positives, but also don't beat yourself up, I think is a really healthy headspace to be in. But yeah, we're gonna act crazy. I've been going to the fridge 10 times a day because there's nothing better to do.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's like, what am I looking for here in the fridge? I'm clearly looking for something that isn't in the fridge, but I'm still going to keep going here, hoping that I find it in this carton of ice.
I always just end up drinking out of the whole milk. That's what anyways, man, let's we've been on for just over an hour here. Let's kind of wrap this up in the sense so my last few notes here are just creating an environment to thrive in. And I am speaking to parents right now. I am speaking to coaches right now, and I am 100% speaking to everybody listening as well. Creating an environment for yourself to thrive in. Parents and coaches create environments for your players and children to thrive in. And I can throw that out. It sounds great. It sounds awesome. I understand it's hard, and especially you as a super competitive coach, or parent that is wanting to win all of the time, which I think is a good thing, but too much of one thing I think is a bad thing. Creating an environment that you do want to win, you are going to try your hardest and you are going to do your best, but it's not a environment that's going to pull people down if they don't reach that. I think is a kind of healthy space, a nurturing one that, like Doss said, you are able to hear out your players and kids. Players having an opportunity to have a real conversation with yourself, understanding you feel certain ways, and even though you're maybe dissatisfied with how you're feeling, being okay with that and understand that you can make positive changes as well. I think is a really good quality headspace for you to be in personally. So Doss, just want to hear your final thoughts on those things, as well as plug whatever you want, whatever you're doing, and maybe leave people with a couple positive stress relief and coping mechanisms that you've seen be pretty helpful to maybe some of your players or students that you've worked with.
So in terms of, I think there's proactive things that coaches, parents, and players can each be doing in terms of either right now or, down the road. But so for coaches, I think, so I've had a chance to speak to quite a few coaches, and I've taught a couple classes that were filled with coaches to be. And one of the things that came from those conversations is, the importance of coaches knowing where to go if and when they do see something going on mental health wise with a player that they aren't qualified to address, or they aren't trained to help someone through. I think there's coaches generally are such good people. They understand people very well, and so I think it's what's up?
Oh, I just said one of the most influential figures.
Influential. In our experience, at Hope, Coach Fritz is an incredibly in tune, interpersonal guy. He knows people very, very well. And so I think one of the things that could be helpful for coaches is, using, when they do observe something going on, or maybe there's a question mark if something more is going on with a certain player, is to have resources on deck that they can go to bring people in if they need to bring people in, or to refer student athletes out if they need to refer student athletes out, but to have some kind of network in place with a mental health provider or professional, either for consultation or for direct referral. I think that would be really that could ease the burden that maybe some coaches feel when they do see something going on and they feel like they have to be the ones to, or, you know, they're the only ones who know about it or whatever, to place that responsibility in the hands of a professional in that regard. You know, I think parents, I've said this already, but just encouraging parents to make room for their kids' experience and not to, at least not immediately to judge or to tell them to feel something else, or, you know, not to lead with, you know, wow, wasn't that exciting? And it's like, well, that gives it kind of pigeonholes the kid into feeling like, okay, I either have to be excited about this or I'm going to maybe upset mom or dad or whatever that is. And then I think it is toughest in some ways for players, you know, if you are struggling with, you know, first and foremost, this, you know, if anything that was shared today, you know, does trigger or causes, you know, you to think more about your mental health, don't be afraid to continue that conversation, you know, make it known to, again, whoever feels safest in your life, and know that you can also be the one who goes out and searches for a mental health provider that you feel connects with you. You know, there's a lot of different types of counseling, different types of therapy. You know, there is the conventional, you know, one-on-one kind of stagnant environment. Not stagnant, but like, yeah, industrial, just, it doesn't feel as maybe warm and receptive as, you know, there's a lot of ways that people do therapy. And so, you know, if you are struggling to know that you have those resources to reach out, connect with a therapist. But again, I think it starts with, you know, making your experience known to parents and people who you do feel are safe. And then I guess in terms of, you know, what you can be doing right now during this time, I mean, it's so strange. You know, to Devin's point, there's like the opportunity to make your schedule for some people whatever you want, and you know that there is a chance to really maybe focus on some aspect of your game or some aspect of your sport, or bigger, some aspect of your life that you want to work on. And I think there are really great opportunities right now to have that kind of self-direction and that self-determination to pursue those things. And on the flip side, it's like it's a weird time because there's like this weird freedom of I can do whatever, and then also this weird restriction of like, but I can't do these things, I can't see these people, and I don't really know what the future looks like, and that makes me feel like less motivated to do anything. So I think that fine line for me, my tip would be just focus on just one thing, just like one thing, and it doesn't have to be big. It can be like really small, actually. Like I want to work on my footwork. You know, infield or whatever it is. So I think that can, you know, I think what that can do is it can give a sense of you are still working towards something, even if you don't have a season right now, or there's a question mark for your fall season or whatever. I think you can still be doing things to convey to yourself that you're working on your game that will eventually return, even if you don't know when it'll return right now. And then the other thing, which, you know, there's been a million articles written about what to do during COVID, but I do, you know, the importance of connection is still really important. And so, you know, wherever you can get that, I would definitely encourage just continuing to connect. My tendency has been to isolate and to, you know, it's hard during a time when, you know, when I can't physically connect with my people, with my friends. It can be harder to be motivated to do so, but you know, the importance is still really high because relationships are a huge part of, you know, what gives life a lot of meaning. So yeah, I would say work on one thing that you can get better at, and stay connected.
Awesome. All right, brother. Well, I'll let you go there. Unbelievable.
Cheers.
To you. Let's do this again in the future. I'm sure it's going to spark a lot of conversations, hopefully healthy conversations within
I'll shoot you. I'll have you, you can post, or I'm trying to think in terms of if people wanted to reach out. My website is ericdawsonlcsw.com. There's a contact form there. If you wanted to continue this conversation with me, you're welcome to. But yeah, thanks for having me, Dev.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And yeah, for everybody listening, reach out to Dawson. That's what he's here for. This is what he does professionally, and would love to talk to you. So again, plug that website one more time. Eric Dawson LCW. Is that what it was?
W.
Say it one more time.
So it's Eric Dawson LCSW.com.
SW. Awesome. All right, brother.
Yep.
Thanks again.
Yep.
Cheers.